Okay, so what if we could actually rewrite our own biology? I'm not just talking about curing diseases, but making ourselves better, stronger, smarter, you name it. And believe me, this is not science fiction anymore. Today, we are going to dive deep into the very real, and let me tell you, very complex ethical debate around human genetic enhancement. And we're going to focus specifically on the conversation that's happening in China right now. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll unpack the core ethical problem itself. Then we'll get into the big scientific breakthrough in China that basically turned this whole thing from theory into a reality overnight. From there, we'll explore the nation's surprisingly nuanced debate, check out a new proposed framework for how to handle all this, and finally, we'll tackle the biggest question of all. What does this mean for the future of, well, us?
All right, first things first, we've got to understand the fundamental conflict here. For centuries, medicine has really been about one thing: healing the sick. But what happens when our technology gets so good that we can go way beyond just healing?
And this quote from political scientist Francis Fukuyama just nails it. This is the classic ethical line in the sand. Is the point of medicine to fix what's broken, or is it to upgrade what's already working just fine? That single question is pretty much the dividing line for this entire massive debate. The official term that gets thrown around for this is human genomic enhancement, or HGE. The key thing to get here is that it's not about fixing a genetic problem. It's about using these incredible genetic tools to improve traits that aren't diseases at all. We're talking about things like higher intelligence, insane athletic ability, maybe even a much, much longer lifespan.
For a long time, ethicists kept these two ideas in very separate boxes. Therapy, on one hand, is all about getting someone back to a healthy baseline, to recover capacities. Enhancement, on the other hand, is about boosting a person beyond the normal range, to add capabilities that they wouldn't have naturally. For a while, that distinction was the bedrock for all the ethical rules.
But here's where it gets really messy. In the real world, that nice, clean line gets incredibly blurry really fast. Just think about it. Preventative medicine, like a vaccine, is technically enhancing a perfectly healthy person to give them immunity. And what's normal anyway? The idea of a normal height has totally changed over the last century. But the biggest issue is that the exact same tool you'd use to fix a deadly genetic disease could be used to give someone a genetic advantage. The technology is the same. The only difference is the intention behind it.
This whole blurry line didn't just get fuzzy, it practically vanished because of one single world-shaking event in China, all powered by a revolutionary technology. The speed of all this is just staggering. In 2012, CRISPR comes on the scene. It's like finding a word processor for DNA, making gene editing cheap, easy, and precise. Just 3 years later, scientists in China are already using it in the lab on non-viable embryos to test out therapies. But then in 2018, everything changed. A scientist named He Jiankui didn't just stay in the lab. He crossed the line that no one thought would be crossed for decades. He announced he'd created the world's first gene-edited babies, changing their DNA to give them resistance to HIV.
And that was it. The He Jiankui affair was the flashpoint. It yanked this entire debate out of the textbooks and made it terrifyingly real. Now, he claimed he was preventing a potential disease, but the babies themselves were healthy. To the rest of the world, this wasn't therapy. This was enhancement, adding a brand new trait that could be passed down through generations. And suddenly, every government on the planet, especially China's, had to deal with a future that had arrived way, way too soon.
As you can imagine, that single event kicked off a massive and honestly a surprisingly complex national conversation inside of China. So let's take a look at what people there actually think about all this. Now, you might assume that after the global outcry, the Chinese public would be firmly against this stuff. But the data tells a completely different story. A survey from 2019 showed that the biggest group, we're talking almost half the people asked, supported using gene editing for both healing and enhancement. Fewer than 1 in 5 were against both. This points to a public that is way more open to the possibilities of this technology than a lot of people outside China might think.
And this division runs right through China's academic and philosophical communities too. On one side, you have proponents who see enhancement as a logical next step, a way to perfect human nature, and they even tie it to traditional Confucian ideas of self-improvement and family well-being. But on the other side, you have opponents sounding the alarm, arguing that we'd be playing God, creating a new genetic class system, and triggering a massive identity crisis for future generations.
And if you dig into the academic papers being published, a clear trend emerges. An analysis of articles from a major Chinese database found that less than 23% actually objected to non-medical enhancement. Now, this doesn't mean it's a total free-for-all. It suggests that most scholars have accepted that enhancement is coming, and their focus has shifted from if we should do it to how we should do it. How do we regulate it? How do we supervise it? And believe me, this is not just an abstract philosophical debate. This has very real policy implications. For instance, the Chinese government's silver economy policy, which is aimed at its aging population, is actively encouraging research into gene technology for anti-aging. And that right there is a government-backed push into an area that sits squarely on that blurry line between therapy and enhancement.
So you've got a public that's pretty open to the idea, a divided academic community, and a government that's clearly interested. The need for a solid ethical framework is, well, urgent. So let's look at a new blueprint that's been proposed specifically for China's unique situation.
But here's the thing. To get the proposed solution, you first have to understand the cultural context it's designed for. You see, Western ethical frameworks often put individual choice above everything else. But in China, there's a heavy emphasis on the family, the collective good, big tech projects are often driven by the state, and social stability is always a top priority. So any new rules have to work within that very different, collectivist, government-driven reality. So the proposed solution is this three-pillar framework. It's designed to balance being cautious with making progress. It kicks off with a core principle of safety. Then it sets up a model for public conversation. And finally, it creates independent groups to oversee the whole shebang. Let's break each of those down. Pillar number 1 is the precautionary principle. And this is a huge deal. It basically flips the normal script on innovation. Instead of move fast and break things, the rule becomes prove it safe before you do anything. The responsibility isn't on the public to prove something is harmful, it's on the scientists to prove it's safe. It essentially treats any new gene editing application as guilty until proven innocent. The second pillar is all about redesigning the conversation itself. It wants to get rid of the old top-down model, where the experts just lecture the public. Instead, it calls for a real dialogue, putting patients, ethicists, the public, and government officials all at the same table to talk things through as equals, not as teachers and students.
And the third pillar is what makes it all work on the ground. It proposes setting up independent, regional ethics review centers. This is so important because the review boards inside universities or companies can have massive conflicts of interest. These centers would be separate, and their decisions would all be logged in a central online database so that the rules are applied consistently all across the country.
So when you put it all together, what does this path forward really look like? I mean, we're talking about a system that's designed to govern not just some new gadget, but potentially the future course of human evolution itself.
And the whole mindset behind this framework is captured by a classic Chinese expression, feeling the stones as you cross the river. The idea isn't to write a final, perfect set of laws on day one. It's about building a process to move forward carefully. You take one step, you make sure your footing is solid, and you learn from that before you even think about taking the next step. It's a blueprint for adapting when you're facing something completely new and uncertain.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? This framework we've talked about is one answer to how China might navigate this future. It suggests that the pen should be held by everyone through a slow, careful, collaborative process. But as this technology gets more powerful all around the world, it's a question every single society is going to have to answer for itself. If we can really become the authors of our own genetic story, who gets to decide what we write?
We're standing right on the edge of a technological cliff. And what's over that edge could reshape not just our world, but what it even means to be human. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a massive, ambitious experiment, one that's happening right now in China. So let me just ask you this, right off the bat. Would you do it? Would you edit your own kid's DNA? This isn't science fiction anymore. Not really. It's a choice that's knocking on our door. And how you answer that question, well, it gets to the very heart of the biggest debate of our time. So when we say human enhancement, what are we actually talking about? Well, it's a whole toolkit of new technologies, things like gene editing, brain implants, powerful new drugs, all designed to push us beyond our normal biological limits. And it's turning these long-running what-if debates into very real, very urgent decisions we have to make. All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the enhancement revolution itself. Then we'll look at the two different worlds of the West and China. After that, we'll dive deep into China's grand strategy, especially for its military. We'll also unpack the new ethics being debated, and we'll wrap up with the huge dilemma this all creates for the rest of the world. Okay, so let's start with Act 1, the Enhancement Revolution. A new frontier is opening up, but unlike the frontiers of the past, this one isn't out in space or across an ocean. It's a journey inward, into our own DNA. And from the get-go, the world is completely split on whether we should even be taking this journey. So, enhancement isn't just one thing. You can kind of think of it in three main buckets. First, there's cognitive, making us smarter with things like brain interfaces. Then, there's physical, making us stronger with exoskeletons or genetic tweaks. And finally, there's emotive enhancement, using drugs to control our feelings or even prevent trauma. So why is all this happening now? Well, you can boil it down to one word: CRISPR. For decades, designer babies and super soldiers were just ideas. But CRISPR is like a pair of molecular scissors for our DNA. It's precise, it's cheap, and it has dragged this entire conversation out of the philosophy classroom and into the halls of power. The tech is here, it's real. And that raises a really uncomfortable question. Someone is going to develop this tech. So if the West is tapping the brakes, caught up in ethical debates and public fear, who's putting their foot on the gas? And that brings us to this tale of two worlds, because that's really what we're looking at. In the West, you have a lot of skepticism, a lot of red tape. But in China, you've got this perfect storm of public support, government backing, and just raw national ambition. It's creating a completely different playing field. Let's look at the West first. There was a huge Pew study in the US that really laid it bare. The vast majority of Americans said no thanks to a brain chip for better memory. And a whole lot of people just find the whole idea morally wrong. We're not talking about a fringe opinion here. This is the mainstream. So why all the pushback? Well, it really boils down to a few big fears. 1, is it safe? We're messing with the source code of life here. 2, the ethics of it all, this whole idea of playing God. And 3, a really deep anxiety about creating a new class system, a world of the enhanced and the unenhanced. Our cultural nightmare is basically the book Brave New World, and that's a warning, not a how-to guide. But then you pivot to China, and it is a totally different landscape. Public opinion is way more positive about all this. Some researchers even connect this back to a cultural memory of state-led eugenics programs, which, believe it or not, has created a much more accepting public attitude toward this kind of genetic intervention. Okay, let's just put this side by side, because the difference is staggering. On one side, the West, opposition, moral concerns, worries about safety. On the other, China, much more approval, with a focus on how this can help the nation get ahead. This fundamental split in how people feel about enhancement changes everything. And that public mood translates directly into rules and regulations. Western countries tend to have outright bans, or they cut off government funding for the most controversial research. China's approach? It's more like guidelines than hard laws. And the government? They're not banning it, they're funding it directly. And this isn't just theory. This has real-world consequences. Way back in 2015, with cash from the government, Chinese scientists became the very first in the world to edit the DNA of human embryos. So while the West was still debating, China was already in the lab, doing the work. So you have to ask yourself, is this all just happening by accident? No way. This is all part of a deliberate, top-down grand strategy. It's been carefully engineered to win what China's leaders see as the defining race of the 21st century. To really get what's happening, you have to understand that this one core idea in Chinese policy, for them, technological development is national security. They're two sides of the same coin. Being the world's tech leader isn't just about the economy. It's about survival. It's about destiny. And this isn't just some vague ambition. They have a detailed roadmap. Just look at this timeline. Since 2015, you see plan after plan, each with concrete goals, all building towards one thing: making China the undisputed center of the AI universe by 2030. It's methodical, it's systematic, and it is relentless. Now here's a term you absolutely have to know to understand this: military-civil fusion. What does it mean? It means there's no wall separating the civilian tech world from the military. A breakthrough in a university lab or a startup company doesn't stay there. It gets funneled directly to the People's Liberation Army. You know, words really matter in these official plans. And in the very latest one, a new word popped up: intelligentization. This signals a big shift. It's moving beyond just having an economy that's informed by data to one that is actively driven by artificial intelligence. It's a whole new level of ambition. So where does all of this lead? Let's zoom in now on what might be the most consequential part of this whole strategy: the military. and this relentless pursuit of the so-called intelligent soldier. And listen, don't take my word for it. This quote is pulled directly from China's own national defense strategy. The government itself is stating, officially, that the future of war is intelligent warfare. This isn't just a possibility, it's the plan. So what does this intelligent soldier actually look like in practice? Well, we're talking about some seriously futuristic stuff. Brain-computer interfaces that let a soldier pilot a drone with their thoughts. Neural links for silent mind-to-mind communication. Headbands to zap the brain to stay focused. And of course, bionic exoskeletons to make soldiers faster and stronger. And again, you have to pay attention to the language they're using because it tells a story. The terms are shifting from cooperation to integration, from interface to control. That's not just semantics. It points to a future where the human soldier isn't just working with the machine, but might actually be a component inside an AI-driven system. But it's not all just pedal to the metal ambition. They know how complex and dangerous this is. This quote from a military researcher shows that they understand this is a highly experimental path. The road to the intelligent soldier runs through the laboratory, with countless simulations and tests. They're being cautious, even as they're being bold. Now, it's really easy to look at all this and just see one big, unstoppable government machine. But you know what? That's not the full picture. Inside China, there is a very real, very lively debate going on about the ethics of the future they're building. And you can actually see this playing out in a really fascinating place: science fiction. The latest Chinese sci-fi novels and movies, they're obsessed with the human-machine relationship, with what it means to be a cognitive cyborg. This is how a culture wrestles with big, scary ideas and shapes how people feel about the future. But then, in 2018, the debate went from theoretical to terrifyingly real. A scientist named He Jiankui announced he'd created the world's first gene-edited babies. It caused a global firestorm, and inside China, it was a massive wake-up call. Suddenly, this wasn't an academic debate anymore. It was an urgent crisis that needed rules, and it needed them fast. And the government's response to that scandal was swift, and it was serious. In just a few years, they rolled out a whole new legal framework, new civil codes, new criminal laws, a biosafety law, a whole suite of regulations designed to put some guardrails on this technology. They were trying to build the rules of the road for an ethical future. And it isn't just the government either. Chinese researchers themselves are proposing some really thoughtful ways to manage all this. They're talking about a precautionary principle, basically first do no harm. They're suggesting public platforms for transparency, and get this, even a circuit breaker system to stop a project if the public turns against it. This shows they're really thinking hard about how to build trust. Okay, so we've seen the strategy, the ambition, the internal debates, but what does it all mean for the rest of us? Well, that brings us to the final and maybe the toughest part of this story, because as China forges ahead, the rest of the world is left with a truly unenviable dilemma. First, you have to understand the temptation. The potential rewards here are just massive. Imagine boosting your entire population's average intelligence by just a few points. The economic growth would be explosive, or creating unbeatable Olympic athletes. Some even whisper about using genetics to reduce crime. The pull of these advantages is incredibly powerful. And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the problem for the West. This bioethicist, G. Owen Schaefer, he just nails it with this quote. The choice is awful. You can either fail to enhance, stick to your morals, and risk getting left in the dust, or you can give in, enhance your people, and deal with whatever monstrous consequences, moral or physical, come with it. It's a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't. Let's break that down. There are really only two ways this can go, right? Path number one, human enhancement turns out to be incredibly dangerous. In that case, the world just has to sit and watch as China conducts a risky, maybe unethical experiment on its own people. Path number two, it turns out to be amazing and safe. Well, then the world sits and watches as China takes humanity's next evolutionary step, potentially leaving everyone else behind. And that leaves us with one final massive question. Not for you or for me, but for all of us as a species. One of the world's great powers is making a full-throated, state-sponsored push to go beyond our biological limits. As it takes its first steps into a possible post-human future, the rest of humanity has to decide what to do. Do we follow? Do we resist? Or do we just get left behind? The answer to that question is going to define our future.